All right, here we are at the reboot. Here I am. Now, I feel like I need some sort of symbol, some kind of marker, something to indicate that I've gone through a lot, like something is missing from me. Something damaged, if you will. Hi, welcome to Film Stash. My name is Douglas Campbell, and today we are talking about 2024's reimagining of The Crow. Eric Draven and Shelley Webster are both brutally murdered when demons from her dark past catch up with her. Given the chance to save her soul by sacrificing himself, Draven returns from the dead to seek revenge against their killers. Before we dive right into the review, I'd like to thank my girlfriend Steffany Hitt for doing my makeup this week. Now, this I think it's the most extreme that this makeup has been in the franchise. She definitely was inspired by the poster, and I gotta admit, this poster was kind of neat. It was cool. I want to thank you for doing this great job, and I love you, sweetie. So the film was pitched as a reimagining of the original comic, and it has been in development hell since 2008. It's gone through various filmmakers to helm the project. It's even gone through various different actors portraying the titular Crow. This includes Bradley Cooper, Luke Evans, Jason Momoa, and various others. And since 2008, various concept arts with these actors and even test footage has been unveiled. The rights to the film were acquired from Miramax by Lionsgate for approximately $10 million. And after all of that, the new Crow has finally been released. And it's just okay. It's alright. More bland than anything. I think it's one of the better follow-ups to The Crow. It's not really saying much. It still doesn't have the original film's soul. I hope you're enjoying this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this with your friends. Any support will be greatly appreciated. And now, back to the stash. Let's look at some of the positives of this film. The cinematography of the city, there's finally style again. We went through two direct-to-video sequels back to back where it just looked either like the CW or with a camera you just shot it in my backyard. This time around, when it comes to the cinematography of the city, it ditches that Tim Burton aesthetic that the first two movies had, and instead it seems like it's more inspired by the latter Batman films, what you would see with Christopher Nolan and even Matt Reeves. The action itself, it's very visceral and violent and bloody, and there does seem to be an intention to all this gratuitous violence. It's very similar to the first film's intention with the action. A notable scene that stands out in my mind, at least after watching this movie, is the theater scene. The one where everybody's watching the opera and the Crow comes in to look for the big bad. Now, while most things, if you involve an opera in it, it could be overly pretentious. And definitely, I think this film, like how they do it, it is a little overly pretentious. It's still so much fun to watch. And the bloody action and the lighting and just how this Crow looks as he's going deeper and deeper into battle against all these henchmen, it is just so cool. I do get sucked into it almost like it is an R-rated Batman film. Now that one is the big standout. I do wish that they had more action sequences like that. I definitely think it would have helped this Crow stand out even more. Now, what they do with the Crow's healing factor, I actually am surprised that no other Crow movie has really done this before. With this film, healing factor is still a factor with the character, but they make it look painful. It doesn't look fun to heal. If you get slashed open, you're struggling the whole time and it looks like it hurts. I haven't really seen something like this done in too many superhero movies before. The extreme in which you get of that is Wolverine, in which case it's like, oh, nothing to it. Or Deadpool, where it's played off for comedy. Alright, let's go right into the things that I am not quite so sure about. Bill Skarsgård, he gives a very, very, very mixed performance. Whenever he is the Crow, I like him as the Crow. Whenever he's Eric Draven at the beginning of the movie, I'm not quite sure how to see that performance, and I definitely will get more into that with my negatives, but one thing I will say is that his performance in the movie, it resembles a superhero transition from Pete Davidson as you know him right now, maybe a little more quiet, less funny, to a parody of Robert Pattinson's Batman. But despite some of the odd performance choices, I did eventually grow to like Bill Skarsgård as the Crow. Don't get me wrong, he's not a Brandon Lee. At the very least, he does at least look cool, and he definitely stands out amongst the sequel's Crows, for sure. What makes the world of the first Crow work, at least for a lot of people who really like the movie, besides Brandon Lee, it was a representation of an underrepresented goth culture at the time. Moving forward in terms of a reimagining and a reboot, let's call it what it is, a reboot. I think updating the story utilizing the 2020s party culture, I don't think it's a bad idea. But it doesn't have that same stylistic tinge of difference that the 90s film had. Only because right now I feel with the internet and just with how many different shows have used this, I feel like we see more of the 2020s party culture today more than ever. It didn't have that, whoa, we are exploring a new world. It just kind of felt more generic. It kind of felt like generic Netflix-y to me. Interestingly enough, this movie, it does seem to go after my critiques of the initial Crow movie, if you remember way back then. I feel like you didn't have quite enough time with Eric and Shelley to fully mourn their deaths. And this one, it seems to want to fix that, at least with this new rendition, by focusing quite a bit on the romance angle before they ultimately get killed. And I guess I thought that this exploration of the relationship, I thought it would fix things for sure. They do not have any romantic chemistry at all. Because I feel like that's kind of the crux of how this whole thing even works, really. The setup of them meeting up in a rehabilitation center and them getting close, I think it is a setup that has quite a bit of potential. But the problem is, with that lack of chemistry, it just doesn't work, man. Truth be told, I didn't really buy them as a couple. They just looked like two young people that wanted to bone, and that's it. Like, they really did not have any kind of chemistry. I didn't feel as fully connected with these guys as I did with the Eric and Shelley of the original movie. And their time was very limited, I might add. And with that runtime, I feel like their backstory, it just felt way too dragged out. It went on for so long. And really, ultimately, the only thing that sold what they were trying to go for and the tragedy of it all, I think it was Bill Skarsgård's performance. He's able to express grief quite well, and I do think that that elevates the material a little bit. This takes way too long to get to where it needs to go. So, as a commenter pointed out a couple of weeks ago whenever I started my whole Crow journey, they said that my critique, while it was perfectly valid, that they felt that if you showed too much of their romance and them being together, there was too much of a risk of the backstory coming off as too sappy and maybe even a little cliche to a degree. Unfortunately, I kind of agree. Seeing it done the way I imagined it should have been done in the first movie, maybe not as long. A lot of the romance just felt too forced and really sometimes cringy. Like, there are quite a lot of cringy lines in this thing. You're damaged enough, that's why I love ya. The world of the Crow, like the Crow Purgatory, I think it's very neat looking. Now, it's not the most creative thing of all time, but any gothic atmosphere where you have a bunch of crows like just flying around, like, it's definitely a cool aesthetic, and I think it works for the Crow. Besides those cool design elements, I think that the logic behind it didn't fully work, and unfortunately I'd have to dive more into that with my negatives. This is so ironic. I will tell you this right here. When it came to the first film's villains, I thought they were way too over the top, they were goofy as hell, they were essentially Batman villains from like the 1960s TV show, or even the Schumacher take on Batman. But now we are getting the polar opposite with these villains. They are acting way too seriously, they're not really written all that well, and they are just so bland. I can't really remember any of them. The only villain that I remembered, it was Danny Huston, who played the main villain. Now, he played Stryker in X-Men Origins Wolverine, and essentially, that's the role he plays here. It fits him like a glove, but it's just generic bad guy. But this time, he has the demonic power of whispers. He plays like the few creepy scenes they have of his demonic whispers very well. Other than that, his villain was just written so generic and boring, and the stakes are obviously he sends innocent people to hell, but there really felt like there was no stakes with this villain. Also, with his abilities where he's able to whisper and people's darkest desires, and through persuasion, he's able to get them to do basically whatever he wants them to do. I feel like there were more efficient ways that the villains ultimately could have prevented the Crow, or really anybody, from doing what they do in the movie. Even the main conflict of trying to get rid of the videotape. I feel like with his powers, he could have found so much more efficient ways of settling this, really, but it just makes the villains look incompetent. Now, Bill Skarsgård himself, he was not bad as the Crow. When he does become the Crow, and it does rely on his sad acting, I do think that he pulls it off very well, and he honestly bolsters the romance up way more than the writing and the acting like gives it credit for. But his Eric leading up to that, not so great. This is saying a lot, honestly, but he was a blank slate before he became the Crow. You didn't really know much about his character at all, really. The only thing you knew about him before he became the Crow is that he was damaged. And that's really it. They give so much time in the romance, but they don't give nearly enough time for the actual main character himself. Which I think that's kind of a problem now, because essentially it's the inverse of my problem from the very first movie, where I wanted more time with the couple. Now I get too much time for the couple to where I don't know enough about the main man himself. It's really frustrating. Without Shelley involved, I mean, there's really nothing to the guy. If we're comparing the first movie, and I think I gotta be fair here, you don't know much about Brandon Lee either, but say what you will, like, Brandon Lee has personality. Bill Skarsgård, he does not have personality. So, like what I mentioned with my mixed elements earlier, the mythology of the Crow is greatly expanded upon. You had a Crow Purgatory, you also had a Crow Spirit Guide, and also they finally get rid of the Crow, the main Crow that leads him to his next mission. They finally get rid of that being the main weakness of our hero. And I, for one, am glad about that. But this is where it kind of falls apart a little bit here for me. So this time around, his weakness is that he needs this love in order to maintain the power. There has to be unconditional, unquestionable love from Eric to Shelley, and that could work. But from what the film represents, whenever he does finally see the tape, I feel like anyone could be thrown off by that, but it just seems like after what you were explained about this guy's superpower, there really was no room for doubt. There was no room for doubt. It's like, clearly she didn't kill these people of her own free will. She was made to kill people. He just needed a conflict so that, oh no, he may stay the Crow or not. And it felt like it was wasting time, honestly. And ultimately, the rules of this Crow, what they represent in the film, especially the ending, it just doesn't really work. And I feel like there's too much left open to interpretation to where it's not as enjoyable anymore. It's very confusing. And even though they don't fully explain things within the first Crow, I do feel at the very, very, very least, you do get enough of an explanation to where things are fine. And this one, there are way more questions raised, I feel. Typically, crows, you get motivated, you get brought back to life from your death being so awful that a spirit takes pity on you and brings you back. And typically, when you're resurrected, you have the memories, so you know why you're going after people. With this iteration of the crow, it's like he had to be convinced to go after people. He had to be tricked into going after the bad guys. And I don't know, that's kind of weird to me. It doesn't fully work. You needed to trim stuff, or at the very least, you needed to edit it down to where it's more concise and straightforward. Boom, boom, boom. And even with how they end the movie. So basically, the crow is successful in his mission. Shelley actually does get brought back to life. That's one of the deals he makes with crows. And pretty much, Shelley wakes up back in her body where she would have been found as a dead person. She doesn't end up dying from suffocation. His body is still lying there dead. It's as if no time has passed from the point that he died in the movie and she comes back. That whole middle section in between, was it real? Did he actually come back? Was it a spirit that was just around and was just killing people? Again, like I said, there are so many questions. I feel like the reason for it, and for the unconditional love aspect, I feel like it was only there as a sequel bait. Just something where if the movie was successful enough, or if enough people were latching onto this iteration of the crow, they'd have a jumping off point for the sequel, but I don't know. Judging by the box office last weekend, I don't think it's going anywhere. Now, in the end, after going through all of these movies here, I have gained so much appreciation for that original Crow. Like, it's night and day. So, I actually am going to raise my original Crow ranking to a 7. And this new 2024 interpretation, it's alright. I mean, a 5.5 out of 10. It's definitely trying more than the sequels, but I mean, not as much as City of Angels. That one just got hacked to shreds by the producers. This one at least is trying, but like I said, the soul isn't there. Ranking the Crow movies, I would give at number 5, we have The Crow Wicked Prayer. Get that shit out of my face. Number 4, and this is where it gets tough because they're all kind of the same level of quality from here, but number 4, it would be The Crow City of Angels, really. I feel like that producer's cut did just so much damage to it that even if like you saw something in there, it's so boring. Number 3, you would have this film, 2024's The Crow reboot. I feel like there's enough there to where you can have fun with the campiness and how bad it is, and even some of the fight choreography is awesome, really, despite it being kind of an story. 2, you have the CW Crow, aka 2000's The Crow Salvation. Despite me giving it a lower ranking, I feel like it at least is dumb enough fun that people could be on board for it. And of course, number 1, the one that just skyrockets the competition out of the water, it's the original Crow. That Crow, there's just so much going for it. It's the only version of it that has worked. So for this week's recommendation, I actually am going to recommend, I know, yet another Batman film, but this one I think it does make sense. If you were one of the few people that genuinely loved the 2024 Crow and you haven't checked out Matt Reeves' The Batman, I would highly recommend you check it out. I think they capture that more modern gothic atmosphere, that aesthetic that the Batman set. Well, finally done! I'm finally done with the Crow movies. I'm done. Just be out of this makeup for a while. This is great. So, what movies am I covering next week? Son of a bitch!